What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Live Beyond Average podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Miller. We're jumping on this morning, episode 198. I just got done this morning recording on a Friday here, and it's because I was hunting with my 7-year-old son at the beginning of the week. Got up this morning, took him to school, took my kids to school, and trained my dog this morning, ate some breakfast, messaged some clients, and just sitting down because I wanted to get this out this morning and really just take a few minutes and talk about this because this was such an awesome experience with him this week. As a lot of you guys know, if you've been listening for any time at all, I grew up hunting, filmed a hunting TV show for 8 seasons with my brother, and fully produced it with him. So hunting is definitely a way of life in my family. We have a ton of experience doing it, and it's a big deal to be able to take my kids out and share the things and teach the things that I've learned, that have been passed down from my dad, that were passed down from his dad and my great uncles, all of these things. So it is an important thing to me. And I drew this antelope tag this year. It's in my favorite spot. I've hunted this spot a ton of times. And I asked Eric, I was like, hey man, like, you want to go antelope hunting with me? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, buddy, we're going to hike a lot. Like, in this spot, you put in a lot of miles. You don't have to. You can drive roads. You can see tons of antelope from the roads, but I like to get back. And so I was like, buddy, we're going to hike a lot. He's like, yep. Like, no hesitation. Yep. I'm like, all right. I'm like, we're gonna, like, you want to camp out? He's like, yep. It's like, okay. I'm like, you want to miss school? He's like, yep. So I'm like, all right, cool. So this was a couple months ago, and every few weeks I'd ask him, like, hey, you excited to go antelope hunting? And he's like, oh yeah. And so we got to last week, 1 week away, and I asked him again. I'm like, hey, buddy, like, next week's the hunt. Like, you ready to go hunting? He's like, yes, I can't wait. And I'm like, buddy, we're gonna hike a lot. I'm just making sure he's ready to go. And he's like, yeah, I know. Like, no hesitation again. And he works out with me. This kid is never stops moving. And so exercise, moving around is not an issue for him. But he was ready to go. And so I got him some new hiking boots. He was all set. So we took off Sunday and drove 4.5 hours to my dad's house. We stopped there, ate some supper, and our plan was to stay there Sunday night. And we got done eating, and I'm like, man, it's only like 6 o'clock. We can drive another, the rest of the night and be in where we need to be in by midnight. And versus getting up at 3 a.m. and taking off and trying to be there for part of a morning hunt. So I go, buddy, I'm like, you want to just take off and go? And he's like, yeah. So we took off, and we got in really late to our spot, and we're just gonna sleep in the truck. So kicked the front seat down. I got in the back. He laid down the front seat, and the wind picked up 40 plus miles an hour that night and got zero sleep. So we got up the next morning from next to no sleep and hiked out to one of my favorite high spots. And I just glassed for miles out there looking for antelope. The sun comes up and you can just start seeing them. It's beautiful scenery. And Eric the whole time was just like, it's a beautiful morning. And you guys, the wind is still howling 40 to 50 miles an hour. And he's like, it's so beautiful out here. Like, he doesn't even care. He's just looking at the scenery, and he keeps telling me how beautiful it is. So we tuck in some rocks. There's kind of a rock outcropping up high, and we tuck in there, and he just thinks it is the coolest spot ever. And I brought a pair of binos for him, and we're looking at antelope and spotting them, and he's looking at them. He's just jacked up to be seeing them. We spot a few that are decent, but the wind's blowing so much that I'm like, I really have to get in close for a shot today. So my extended range really was cut down. So there's antelope love to put themselves in spots where you can't get within 700, 800 yards of them without them seeing you. And so the wind's blowing, that's cutting that even down further, so that you're not going to be able to make a long range shot on them. And so I was like, buddy, we got some up in here. I don't think they're going anywhere. Let's go check out another spot. So we hiked out. We drove to another spot and parked and got out. I'm like, buddy, this is couple mile hike into this high point. I'm like, you ready to rock? He's like, yep. So we packed some snacks, got out there, and the whole hike out, we were seeing antelope, and we'd stop in glass and look at them, and no good bucks. So we kept going, and get up to this high point, and the wind is just insane. So we tuck in off the opposite side, try to get out of the wind a little bit, and there's no place to be out of the wind out here. And we see another buck chasing a doe down in the bottom. Um, and I moved down. We moved down a little bit further to try to get up out of the wind so I can bust out my spotting scope and not have the wind vibrating it so bad where you can't even see something worth looking through. And I spot a herd of antelope about a mile away, had 10 or 11 in the herd, and what it looks like a decent buck. And he's nice and tall. And so I was like, buddy, we need to get in a little closer and take a look at this buck. I think this might be the one. We hike in closer, and we end up getting under 400 yards because the way that these antelope had got behind a couple trees, we were able to walk along this little creek bank and stay behind these trees and get pretty dang close to them. And I saw right away that it was a good antelope. And so we dropped the hammer on him. We're 3 miles in, and we got this antelope down. We're pumped, and he's just excited. We get up there, and he puts his hands on the antelope. He's amped up. You know, he couldn't be more excited. We cut up the antelope together. He helps me out. We pack it all up in my pack, and we start hiking this thing out 3 miles back to the truck. And now we're hiking back with the wind blowing right in our face. And you're talking a 40-plus mile an hour wind. You're bucking it the whole way back in your face. And he finally starts getting worn out. He's on like mile 5 or 6, and he's like, man, I'm getting tired, Dad. And I'm like, buddy, all of your classmates are in school right now. And he literally smiles, does a twirl, and he's just happy. Like that second, he just remembers, like, oh yeah, I'm out here like living my best life. And he goes, Dad, you know what the worst thing about school is? And I'm like, what? He goes, they don't give you any time to think about anything fun. And I sat and thought about that for the last mile hike back in, what he had just said. That piece of, they don't give you any time to think about anything fun. Eric is so much an imaginative kid. He loves to play, and he has this huge imagination. You can see it. He'll just jump around the house or outside, and you know something in his mind, what's going on is like he's in a whole nother world because of his imagination. He's thinking. He's having fun. And so just because, you know, you're in a school setting where you're thinking about, you know, math or reading, like all good things, but it's not fun thinking, you know what I mean? It's not imaginative thinking for him. And so, you know, that's the second thing he said that was huge to me. He was talking about how beautiful the morning was. He said that about the thinking. And as we get back to the truck, we get unpacked, and we sit inside, get out of the wind for a minute, and we're both just like, oh man. So we decided to drive back into a little town and get a meal, get a burger. And I was like, man, do you want to go back to Grandpa's tonight and stay? And he's like, well, we just got here. And I feel like most 7-year-olds would have been like, get me out of here. You just put 7 miles on me in high winds in no sleep. And he was like, well, we just got here. And I'm like, well, I still have an archery tag. Like I brought my bow too. We can go archery mule deer hunt. He's like, yeah, I want to do that. And so we stayed another couple nights. You know, the next morning we got up. He wanted to go back to that same spot that we started at that first morning up in those rocks. And I knew it was because he just wanted to play in the rocks. I didn't even take my bow out of the truck. I just took my binos and sat up there and glassed for deer. And I was like, buddy, you play in the rocks and you have fun. And he played in the rocks and he'd glass for deer and he'd play in the rocks. And he was being a boy. And I just thought, I'm like, man, and that thought in my head just goes through, boys will just be boys. And they innately want to play. They want to run around. They want to use their imaginations. And they see the world as their playground. And I just saw this, you know, happening right before my eyes. And I feel like fathers, this is an opportunity to be childlike with your kids or with your son. It's a true invitation to see who your son is. And it gives you permission to give him permission to be him. This is huge. It's an opportunity and an invitation. it's ironically then it inversely then starts to help you to see who you are. Because when you can see who your son is, you when they get in a specific environment and you get to see who they actually are without things getting in the way, you can really see then what fosters them being then. Inversely then you can start looking at your own life and be like, oh man, like where do I get to truly be me? Where do I get to let my guard down, my walls come down, and I'm actually who I am? Which is a hard thing to do. We live in a time that is actually nearly impossible for a person to be authentically them unless they're hearing from their father who they actually are and given permission then to go out and be who they actually are. We've been talking a lot about identity in the podcast here the last couple times since we've been recording, and how not knowing who you are is the root cause of problems. So you can use this to start seeing what gets in the way of your son or your child from being who they are and who they truly are, and start removing the obstacles from what's stopping them. So let's use this as an example. Like, he's out playing in the rocks. If I would have just shoved his iPad or his Nintendo Switch in front of him, like we hike out there, I'm like, yeah, we could be sitting in glassing for a few hours. Let's take something to entertain you. He's not who he truly is. He's going to have fun sitting there. Any kid's going to have fun sitting there on an iPad and killing some time. And it doesn't mean he doesn't do that. But that was an obstacle of him being who he actually was if I would have allowed that in that situation. And so we can start using this as an opportunity to remove the obstacles from them. And then again, inversely, this applies to you. What things are getting in the way of you being who you truly are? When we can identify those, we can then fully start removing those obstacles so we can be truly ourselves and we can authentically move into ourselves. Boys will be boys. And I just love that. I don't know why that just kept like popping on my head when I was watching him jump across the rocks and lay on these huge rocks and play and just use his imagination. And it was a special, special moment. And so I knew that we needed to jump on and just give this some thought, because I want you guys to also take some of these thoughts then and be like, it's going to help take you into a moment where you saw your son or you saw your child being who they really are. And then you can see them in an environment that maybe you're fostering that isn't helping them be who they really are. And you're going to have these times where we're not going to be perfect at it. But the whole point is to start improving at it. The whole point is to live beyond average with it, right? And so, man, boys will be boys, and it's a good thing. And we need to just continue to give that permission and allow us to look at a good father that gives us permission to be us, and start actually believing that and living that out, so we can actually give permission to our own sons to then go be them and not have this confusion of who they are, who they're supposed to be, because they're already going to know it, because innately it's already in them. And they're not going to have to sit there and have this conflicting nature thought process in their mind going back and forth of what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, who they are, who somebody else says they are, who I think I maybe who I should be, and all of this confusion that's happened because of a teaching of a conflicting nature, which actually they don't have. It's key. You guys, I hope this stems a lot of thoughts for you, and you can just continue to take this and run with it, or start the conversation. It's powerful, you guys. We're just moving into this season, this time. I don't even like to use the word season. We're just moving into a time that is very unique and very special. And I hope you guys just continue around that. We're going to continue talking about this, on how when we're moving it again into our true identity, it frees us up it frees us up to really start achieving without striving. And that's huge. You guys, I hope you have an awesome weekend. If you're listening to this weekend or next week, if you're listening to it early on in the week, share it with somebody that you think might benefit from it as well. And we'll catch you next time.